Great. Well, thanks for having me. I'm going to take things in a slightly different direction. I think you'll find an interesting presentation. We're going to focus on the call center space, which is really an area that's usually not getting a lot of focus in conferences like these. I think for many people, call centers seem like a hostile, unfriendly place for innovation, for hackers, for a do-it-yourself kind of project. And in some sense, that's true. It's a deserved reputation. And really, what I want to do in this presentation is talk about why that's happened and when we can expect it to change. And it does need to change because there is a lot of work to be done in the call center space to get it up to speed with what's happening in the rest of the customer service world. There's an enormous amount of innovation happening in other channels, chat in particular, and bots, as we heard earlier today. We really need to this piece of the puzzle to get up to speed as well. And that represents a big opportunity for developers like you, for entrepreneurs. I'm trying to pack into this presentation some background so you understand what forces you're working against and why they are the way they are. So the main thesis here is that call centers predominantly sat on the sidelines during the big revolution we had over the last decade in voice technology. And I really see that revolution as happening in two phases. The first was, I'm giving it the year 2005. There's no specific start point, but this is about when its heyday occurred. And it went by the name Voice 2.0. Those of you that were around at the time, my friend Thomas Howe, who was an earlier presenter, was very involved in this space. You'll remember all of this stuff. And so the Voice 2.0 world was really motivated by the emergence of Asterisk, which is the open source PBX, still a big factor today, and the availability of low-cost termination for the first time. So really those two factors together, for the first time, you could hack together something in the communication world with the ease that formerly was just limited to the web world. You could, send out a text message that your plants needed watering. You could, send out outbound voice. You could take inbound calls and route them to another place, and you could do this without a lot of heavy lifting from a developer point of view. And that sort of encouraged a whole wave of startups. You may remember some of these names, Jaja and Jackster. For some reason, J names were very popular at the time. Grand Central was a big winner at this point. They were bought by Google, became Google Voice. And in parallel, sort of the grown-up version was called Communication-Enabled Business Processes, a very unwieldy term. So it was the same sort of concept starting to find its role inside the enterprise, using text messages or automated calls to connect different departments of a company and try to use these technologies to lubricate some processes that were inefficient. And as you see in the diagram down there, the call center really was immune to this assault. All the vendors in the space kept on doing what they were doing, and they stayed in their silo. By the way, I realize I'm mixing my metaphors, that's a turret and not a silo. But silo is just not a great image. That's the word everybody uses, but I wanted to have this kind of motif of the assault. But anyway, so that's wave one. Wave two is the one we're really living with now, which is the CPaaS, communication platform as a service. Twilio, the big superstar here, having gone public earlier in the year, and that's a really great way to punctuate this era. I guess it's an exclamation point at the end of the sentence, showing that this model towards communication has really come into its own and become the dominant way to do things. And the players you see on here really have started to take some chunks out of the turret, represented by the cannon there. I wanted to have an image with the turret taking some damage, but I didn't have time to find all the right stock images. So there are some pieces being cleaved off of the call center world. It is no longer a monolithic piece that is immune to the kind of innovation that's happening. So outbound voice, a lot of that has been sort of chopped off and either done as an outsourced way, or people are hacking it with these APIs, especially when it comes to notifications through text messages. A lot of IVR stuff is done separate from the main call center. So there are pieces moving away from the central piece as the central business of the call center, but the core of it, which in the industry we call the ACD, the automated call distributor, that piece still has is intact and withstanding all the assaults from without. So the ACD is really the bleeding heart of the beating heart, I should say, of the call center. It's the thing that takes all the incoming calls and queues them up, divides them into different queues, whether it's a tech support queue or customer support queue, and matches them to the agents that have the right skills and that are logged on. Really that the central piece of logic that handles all that stuff. That is still separate from this CPaaS world. That is still something that is the exclusive, territory of a handful of vendors out there, and has been immune so far to the big change. And that really is at the core of why the call center world stays separate from the rest of the telecom space that is, moving so rapidly. Uh, let's take a look at some of the reasons why call centers are this way, why they're somewhat unfriendly to innovation. And this is in no particular order. So number one is that the handling real-time voice, especially at scale, at high volumes, especially when they come in and with a lot of concurrent calls, is still technically difficult. Much less so than it was, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But there's a legacy in the space of, that being something very challenging and not for the faint of heart. That was seen as, the domain of specialized engineering that was not, for the hobbyist. Um, the second is that for many companies, the call center is a mission critical thing. If your call center goes down, you're not taking sales calls, or you're going to lose revenue, or you're not handling your support calls. You're going to have angry customers. So it's not a place to take risks. It's not a place to play around with stuff. So you may get the ability, the permission to tinker with the communications product in other areas, but when it comes to the call center, hands off. So that feeds into this attitude. There's also something about the culture of the vendors that we're talking about, Avaya and Cisco and Genesys, that dominate the space where they, for obvious reasons, like controlling this piece of technology and keeping it in a silo and keeping it on a pedestal as something very unique and special. It helps them to sell that product. It helps them to extract money from customers. And so these are large companies that are not, that have not traditionally been very hacker friendly. That's changing, to be sure, especially Cisco. You see them, acquiring Tropo and trying to take on this hacker mentality. But there's a historical trend there. And another contributing factor is the way that the industry itself is structured. A lot of these vendors sell indirectly. So there are resellers, there are system integrators that then take this product and set it up. So many companies you speak to, they have a VAR, a system integrator who is partnered with Avaya or Cisco, and they've brought in the equipment and they've set it up. And so you've got this layer between the end user and the vendor, the software company, and you've got resellers that, for good reason, want to keep themselves employed. They want to maintain an aura of difficulty around things that need to change, and so things that would be that would not be acceptable in the web world, are still the case in the call center world, where small changes, things that you would think should be something that someone on staff could do, something that should be a quick change, many companies have to call in their reseller to, and it becomes a project with and there's a big bill attached to it. And so that has, that's another factor that has inhibited innovation. And finally, this is a factor that a lot of people outside the industry don't appreciate, which is that a lot of call center traffic is outsourced. A lot of companies send their calls to a third party that actually runs the call center. We seem to pay attention to this when it's going offshore, and then everybody loves to complain about not understanding the accent of the guy we have to speak to. But even when it's someone in the same country, when it's not an offshore issue, the fact that calls get outsourced means that the company has lost the ability to do any kind of innovative work, any kind of experimenting on their call center because they don't own it. So that's a huge roadblock. A lot of people will come into this space and say, "Oh, we've got a great idea for innovation. What if the call center could do this? What if it could do that?" And they go out and start pitching to companies, and they hit this brick wall, which is a lot of companies say, "That's a great idea, but I don't actually own my call center, so you can't help me. It's outsourced to a BPO." And if you go to the BPO, you've got a tall order there as well because they don't want to install something unilaterally. Their call center is handling hundreds of different clients, some of whom might be interested and some of whom might not. So a lot of headwinds there preventing innovation in the space. And as a result, a lot of the experience remains stuck in the past. We have a lot of the frustrations that we've seen for decades now. For example, you punch in your information to the IVR, and then you get transferred to the agent, and they ask you for it again. Um, that kind of stuff that really should have been ironed out by now is still with us. And so you have a very high degree of frustration from consumers with this experience. Here, from a recent survey, some of the top complaints I've highlighted waiting on hold because that is, in fact, the business the problem that we sought out to solve with Fonalo. Another interesting factor that's happened with the call centers is what's going on in social media, that they've become a place to complain about the experience. Twitter in particular, you can see lots of people complaining about the call center and in particular waiting on hold. So much so that we launched a little side project called On Hold With. You can go there right now, onholdwith.com, and you will see a live feed of people complaining on Twitter about waiting on hold. And waiting on hold I bring up because it's a great example of the kind of thing that should have been solved by now. We have a much better way to deal with queuing. If you have a lot of people waiting to talk to an agent, you should have a way to just call them back when it's their turn instead of having them sit on the line. It's an obvious win-win to have a callback instead of waiting on hold. It's better for the call center. They're not keeping all those phone lines open. It's better for consumers. They don't have to keep the phone to their ear. And yet this is exactly the kind of thing that can't take root because of all the bullet points in my previous slide. So the good news is that created an opportunity for us at Fonalo. The bad news is it's a symptom of problems that are still endemic in this industry. So that's kind of the background. Let's look at some of the things hitting the call center space today. A lot of people think, well, enterprise software is moving to the cloud. That'll be a big reset for all this stuff, and all the legacy problems will go away. That's true to some extent. Here's a chart of companies moving over their call center to the cloud space, and you see that bottom graph is saying 12 months from now. I think these guys surveyed a few hundred call centers, and 20% of them say that 12 months from now, their call center will be in the cloud. So it's still not a huge fraction. And this is forward-looking. This is 12 months from now. And it's aspirational. Most people hope for something to happen. They may fall short of that goal. And even within that fraction, you've got another problem, which is a lot of people talk about a cloud solution that isn't really cloud. So vendors, and I don't want to name any names, but a lot of the call center vendors are taking their on-premise product and just putting it in a data center as a managed service and calling it a cloud solution. It's not really cloud. And even if you do it in a proper cloud fashion, it doesn't mean that the call center is open and now all these other problems have gone away. So yes, some companies have their call center in the cloud, but a lot of those call centers have the same problems that there's no API, they're not open, the vendors are not interested in innovative services around that call center. It's still that turret. It's just a turret in the cloud, if I can mix my metaphors even further. So what about smartphones? Okay, so everybody's using their smartphone. That's the way they communicate with companies. Maybe that will sort of provide that'll explode the system and let us rebuild it in a new way. But right now we've got a real disconnect between these two worlds. We have no easy way to connect the call center world with the smartphone. And as a result, what most companies do when they have an app is what you see on the screen. Um, and I don't mean to pick on these three companies, they just pick them randomly, but a lot of people, here's the contact us page, they'll just put the phone number. And here you're throwing away all of the power that, these very powerful devices have. You're not maintaining the context that the customers created and using these apps. You're not using any of the powers of the smartphone, the location or the identity. You're basically dropping people into the front door, and they may as well have dialed with a phone from the 1950s. So that has not really provided the impetus for major change. WebRTC caused a big stir and still is. A lot of people think that the call centers will be remade in this vision of browser-based communication. And when Amazon did its Mayday project a few years ago, a lot of people in the industry thought, okay, this is what it's going to look like. We've seen the future, and Amazon is ahead of the game, but soon this is what it's all going to be like. This um, uh, on-demand video agent available from your device. Um, but if you follow the space, you'll know that Mayday was not such a great success, and it was greatly scaled down after a while. Amazon was really a unique case in that they had total control over the device hardware itself and the platform and the network, and of course almost an unlimited budget. If Jeff wants it, then it's going to happen. So this was not really the path forward, and as a result, WebRTC has not really had a big impact on call centers. Adam, how am I doing for time? I forgot to check the clock when I started. Okay. So should we switch to questions then? I got a couple more slides. Okay. Now, another thing people are looking at is the decline of voice in general as a channel, and you'll find some data supporting this. For example, here we have a chart. So the inner ring there is showing things from 10 years ago. The green circle is voice, and we have all these other interactions that are growing. And you see the outer ring, and people say, "Oh, look, voice is being squeezed out. Soon, all our interactions will be chat rather voice." But other data conflicts with that. That's not such a straightforward conclusion. And in general, I would say beware of people making these kinds of claims and say, oh, look, X percent of the interactions are going to be over chat, or they're going to be over video, or they're going to be email. Uh, there is no consensus on how to count interactions. And so this data is always somewhat suspect. And as some cold water, I'll just end on this note about the future of the call center space. Here's another way to look at what's happening. You can go to the government and ask how many people are employed with the title customer service rep, and look at this chart over the last 5 years. So there are a growing number of people whose job it is to sit in a call center with a headset and talk to people. And so this, you can't really square the circle between this data and the idea that everything's moving to self-service and chat and email and social media. This problem is not going away. Voice is going to be with us for a long time to come, and we've got to figure out a way to pull the call center world into this new era. And with that, I'll just switch to questions, and happy to field anything about either call centers or Phonolow or anything you might want to ask.
Any questions for Shai? So, interesting anecdote when you were showing the video, contact center. We talked to a customer was interested in the video contact center and ended up not doing it because of cost. Not the cost of implementing the video equipment and all of that, but you physically needed more square footage per contact center agent in your contact center. You couldn't jam them all shoulder to shoulder on desks. You had to give them enough space to have a video backdrop and everything. And it would cost them so much more money in real estate to do this, they decided to not go ahead with the project. So, when you're talking to a contact center industry where you're trying to shave pennies per year off of each agent, that's one of the other challenges that comes along.
It's true. Yeah, many companies are extremely cost sensitive when it comes to the call center. You have to recognize that to them it is a cost center, and their primary objective is get calls handled without annoying our customers too much at the minimum cost. And so what my company does, which is allow people to have a callback instead of waiting on hold, it requires the agent, when the call comes in, the agent hears a message saying there's someone waiting and press 1, and then we call back the customer to connect them. And we had a customer, major airline, say, well, that's going to take 10 or 15 seconds of agent time, and that's just a non-starter for us because that adds up to too much money when you multiply it across the millions of calls every year. So despite the fact that it was going to be a great experience for consumers, and despite the fact that it was going to save costs in other places, they're so sensitive to every second of agent time that any kind of delay was unacceptable.
So any questions for Shai? All right, well, very good. Shai, thank you for joining us from the US.
Thanks for having me.